Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome everybody to the 9th CompBioMed webinar series. This webinar series is organized in collaboration with the VPH Institutes. My name is Ben Shaya. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Amsterdam. And today we will have Dr. Nargis Zarabi speaking from Surfsara. She is a consultant at the Data Services unit at Surfsara and holds a PhD in computational science from the University of Amsterdam. I would like to add, to keep the webinar moving as quickly and seamlessly as possible, that we will have a section for questions at the end of the webinar. And what you can do is, if you have a question during the webinar, just write it in the questions tab. And at the end, I will read everyone's questions aloud to Nargis so she can answer them. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to you, Nargis.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. As the title of my talk says, I'm going to talk about EUDAT services for fair data management. I hope that by end of this talk, you will learn more about what EUDAT services are, what is fair data management, and how these services can be used to help you as researchers to manage your data, your research data, and to produce more fair data. My talk for today consists of two parts. In the first part, I will briefly introduce what are the data management requirements that the research communities have, and we'll give an overview of the EUDAT services and FAIR principles, and show how these services operate and are interconnected with each other to help the researchers manage their data and also to comply with FAIR principles. In the second part, I will show some demos, some data pipelines and example workflows to show how these services can be used in practice by you as researchers to manage your data, your active research data during your research phase, and also preserve your final research data, like archiving your data, publishing your data, so that it will be preserved in longer term. And also show you how you can, using these services, better find and discover data for doing research. Okay, data, what is the problem? This is a researcher who has some data set and wants to do an interesting research. Most of the times the data or the computation that is needed to do the research doesn't fit in a single computer. So the researcher moves the data to some sort of HPC facility or a high performance computing system to process the data and analyze the data, do the research. And of course, copy the results back to his or her own computer. And when the research is done and it's in the final stage, the data needs to be put in somewhere safe, in a data repository or in an archive system, so that the data is safe. At some point in time, this data needs to be retrieved back from the data repository to do some continuation of the research or reproduce the results that are already there. And you can imagine that there are new experiments being done, new data collected that is saved in that repository, and it's going to be also used in the research. At some point in time, there might be a new person joining your research team, a new PhD, a new researcher, where you want to share your data with, and how it's been done traditionally is that you put the data on a USB stick, give it to that new person, and that new researcher also wants to use the HPC facility to analyze the data and, of course, share the data back with you. And this can go on and on. And at some point, you will lose track of what version of the data did you use to produce what results, and what was the final version of the data that led to a publication of the results, and etc. This is a very typical problem that many researchers face during the course of their research. And I would like to show you in what follows how EUDAT services and how proper data management can help you to address these kind of problems as a researcher. Okay, now what are the data requirements of research communities? Most of the researchers need to give access to the data, especially if there is research that is in collaboration with over distributed places. They need to give access to the data, share data, and transfer data, especially when it comes to intensive data sharing, transfer, or restricted data. Data that comes with privacy issues or data that is sensitive. You cannot just put it in a USB stick and share it with your colleague, but there needs to be certain measures in place that you can do that. The researchers and research communities also need to store the data somewhere safe. They need backups of the data. They need to be able to archive valuable data, synchronize data over distributed places, data provenance, where the data has come from, what's the history of the data that is there. You also want to make your data accessible by the use of persistent identifiers. For example, you want to be able to publish the data with domain-specific metadata, data about your data, and also be able to link the published data back to the raw data and processed data. Another major challenge of scientific communities is to actually discover and find data that is already out there in the data repositories or data collections that is there, not having to produce the data from scratch, but using the data that is already out there. Knowing the data requirements of the researchers and research communities, I would like to briefly introduce you the research data lifecycle, which you might have seen before. There are different definitions for a data lifecycle depending on the data that is being used or the research. This is one of the most simple and generic definitions that I like, and it's from the UK Data Archive source. It starts with creating the data. Creating data doesn't necessarily mean that you create the data from scratch. It can be that you get a data from literature, for example, or a data set is being handed to you by another fellow researcher. So you start with some sort of data, then you move to processing your data, which is the phase that you do pre-processing. You check if the data points are valid, if anonymization is required, if there is missing points in the data. And then you move to the phase that is called analyzing the data. And this is the actual research that you do in your data to interpret the data, to produce outputs from the data and publish those outputs. So this is the research phase. After the research is done, you want to make sure that your research data is being preserved, so that in 10, 20 years, you can still reproduce the output of your research or do continuation. That is the phase where you move the data to some sort of data archive or data repository, make backups of your data, add metadata to your data, and also documentation to make sure that this data that is being stored can be found later on. After having the data, making sure that it's preserved, you want to give access to the data as well. Meaning that you want to be able to distribute the data, give access controls, share the data with other researchers, which brings the data to its last phase, which is actually being reused. And well, new researchers that join a research team should be able to access the data and reuse the data in the research or for research reviews, for example, for learning and teaching purposes. And well, if you're able to reuse the data, this goes again back to the cycle of starting with some data sets and goes back to the data lifecycle. So I introduced this data lifecycle, and later in my presentation, I'll come back to this data lifecycle to show you how the EUDAT services that I introduce will map to the data lifecycle and which service supports you at which stage of the research data lifecycle. The other topic that you hear a lot about these days is FAIR and FAIR data management. The FAIR data, it's basically a set of principles that, or a set of guiding principles in order to make the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These data principles provide guidance for researchers and data managers, data stewards to help to make the most out of the data, and for the data to be reused by other researchers and by the wider research community. This was a set of principles that was put together by a set of researchers back in 2014, so it's quite new in the data management field. And what I think is very important in this FAIR topic is the reusable part, because if you are able to reuse the data, it means that you have been able to find the data, to access the data, and make use of the data. So I'll get back to this FAIR topic again to see how EUDAT will help you to be more fair in your research and produce more FAIR data. Okay, the EUDAT B2 service suite. EUDAT has developed a set of B2, so-called B2 services, very close together with the research communities to facilitate the researchers for doing proper data management on their data, and also making sure that the data is fair. After introducing these B2 services, I will, as I said, link back to the data lifecycle and also to the FAIR principles to see how these services could help you during your research for data management. I will, because of the time constraints, I will just give a very brief introduction to each of these services. And if you have any like more detailed, in-depth questions about each of these services, you can always contact EUDAT contact and support at this link to get more information about these services or get even more involved in using these services in your research or within your research community. This is the so-called B2 services diagram, which shows you, which gives you a general overview of the B2 services, how they are connected and interconnected. As you can see, they support the users and researchers and data management at different layers. At the very bottom is the user management level, which is basically authenticating and being authorized to use the other B2 services. At the data management and preservation level, there are services that ensure you can define data management policies, for example, or produce persistent identifiers for your data objects to make sure that the data will be preserved in longer term. At the data access and sharing level, which is a level that single researchers are more involved, there are services that ensure you can exchange your data and share your data in a trusted and secure manner. And at the data discovery level, which is open to everybody and no authentication or authorization is required, you can actually find and discover new data that is out there. You can also see the flow of credentials, data, metadata in this diagram, where, as you can see, for example, the authentication is almost required for all the services that are in EUDAT, except for the B2 find, which is for the data discovery, and also the data and metadata flow. So you can see that these services are interconnected to support this FAIR data. I'll briefly go through each of these services and introduce to you more in depth. The first service I would like to introduce is B2Access. B2Access is the EUDAT solution for federated authentication and authorization. Any citizen scientist who wants to use EUDAT services can make an account in B2Access and use this account and credentials to log in to EUDAT B2services. B2Access supports different technologies to authenticate. You can authenticate using SAML with your home institutional identity. You can also authenticate with some social identities such as Google or Facebook. You can also create an account in B2Access directly, and in this case, B2Access will be your homeless identity provider. I would like to ask if you can create an account in B2Access so that in the second part of my talk, which is going to be a demo, you can follow the demo as well if you already have an account. So just go to this link, b2access.eu.eu, click on the register a new account on the top right, and you will see such a box with creating and you can choose create B2Access user account, username only, and then fill in the required information and click submit, and hopefully you will get access soon, and then you can use these credentials to log in to the services that I'll show in my demo. B2Drop is EUDAT's solution for personalized cloud. You can compare the functionality with Dropbox, with the difference that whatever data you put in there will remain in Europe. It doesn't exit the borders of Europe. The underlying technology is Nextcloud, and you, as I said, every citizen scientist or every researchers who have access to who has a B2Access account can log in and use this service. You will be there will be 20 gigabytes of storage for free allocated to each researcher if they want to use the service, and if you want more, you can always contact EUDAT to arrange more. It's easy to use. I'll later on show in my demo how you can use this service and how it's integrated with other services at EUDAT. And it's basically a trusted data sharing and data exchange solution. And it's very useful for your research, for the active data, especially in the early phases of your research where you want to share it or exchange data with your collaborators. You can use this service to share the data in a secure manner. The next service is B2Handle. B2Handle is EUDAT's main persistent identifier service, or a PID service as we call it. PIDs are used in EUDAT to reliably identify and cite data objects over a long period of time. So it's a very crucial part of long-term data management within EUDAT. PIDs are globally resolvable. It's being stored in the metadata part of your data, and you can always resolve it through internet. The underlying technology is handle system, and a PID consists of two parts: a prefix, which will be the identity of the research institute or research community, and then using that prefix, you can make as many postfixes and as many PIDs for your data. The next service is B2Share. B2Share is the data repository service of EUDAT, where you can store small or medium, where you can store data in there to be preserved for long term. Every data that is being stored in B2Share will be assigned a PID, and the idea is that you publish your data in an open access way. It is possible that you publish your data and set it as private, but be aware that the metadata of the data that you publish will always be public. B2Share is a service that you publish the data that is in, we call it final data that is in, it will not be changed anymore. So whatever data you publish in B2Share is not possible to delete it, but you can always add like next versions of the data and well, have them linked. It's for publishing, sharing, and preserving data over long term, and the underlying technology is in Vimeo, and you can get access again with your B2 Access credentials or with your other identities. I will also show this service later in the demo part. The next service is B2Find, which is EUDAT's metadata catalog for research data. It is configured as such that it harvests all the data that is being published in B2Share and EUDAT, but it's also harvesting data from external providers via OAI PMH protocol. The underlying technology is CCAN, and this service is, as I said, open to public. No authentication is required to use this service, and it's mainly to discover data that is being published, the metadata, and then it always has the link to where the data is. It's very easy to use, and later I will also show in the demo how you can use this service to discover data and how it's linked to the B2Share service, the data repository, for actually being able to download the data. The next service is B2Safe. B2Safe provides an abstraction layer to virtualize large-scale data resources. Using B2Safe requires some effort from the community, so it's not, let's say, a single researcher can start using this service, but it requires some effort from a community or research institutes to put the infrastructure in place. And once that's in place, it facilitates replicating and transferring large amount of data across different distributed places. The underlying technology is IROTS, and also it makes use of PIDs. So any data that is being replicated with B2Safe will be assigned a PID. As I said, this is a service that your community would need to join EUDAT and work closely together with EUDAT people so that you can well, put the infrastructure in place and make use of it. The features are that, yeah, it supports PIDs for the data, and also you can define data policy, data management policies for your data. For example, if certain data needs to be archived after some point in time, or if some data needs to be transferred to a cheaper storage medium, such as tape, for example. These are the policies that B2Safe and IROTS would take care of automatically. So the end users or the end researchers don't have to worry about where they archive the data or where they store the data. They just put the data in an archiving folder, and B2Safe takes care of how to handle the policies for the data, the data management policies. The next service is B2Stage, which is basically to get your data close to the compute facilities. It's works very close to B2Safe. It's basically a wrapper around the grid FTP for data transfer, which supports a third-party transfer, and also high-performance transferring of the data. So as I said, it's a wrapper around grid FTP, but the added value is that if your data is assigned has metadata, it also supports the metadata functionality for the data. Okay, so I briefly give you an introduction about the B2 services. In this table, you can see the status of each of the services, the version, if they are in production or not, the TRL level. For example, for B2Safe core, you can see that it's in production with TRL level of 9 and stable. B2Share, B2Drop as well. Some new functionalities like integration between the services, like B2Drop, B2Share, for example, which I'll show you in the demos as well. Hopefully, if we have time, are being newly developed. They are in production. Yeah. So how does these services would help you to manage your data and facilitate the data during the data lifecycle? As you can see, services such as B2Drop and B2Share and even B2Stage can help you in the early stages of your research, where you want to share data among research collaborators, or you want to transfer data from an institute into an HPC center, for example, by using of B2Stage. Services such as B2Safe and B2Share can be used when you are more or less done with your research phase and you want to preserve the data, make sure that the data is being preserved for the next 10, 20 years and published in a data repository. Again, services like B2Handle, B2Find are very useful when you want to find new data, when you want to discover new data. So these services make sure that your data will be assigned by a PID, for example, and it's findable through internet. So as a researcher, you want to find new data, but you also should be able to make your own data findable to others. And this is where these services help a lot. EUDAT and FAIR, as I said, we hear a lot about FAIR principles, but how do we put these principles into practice is a big question. Everybody wants to play FAIR, but putting them into practice is the big challenge. As you see, services such as B2Find, for example, or B2Handle, B2Share would help that your data is findable and also accessible. And later reusable. If you publish your data in B2Share, for example, a PID will be assigned and it will be open to public. So this helps other researchers to find their, and it will be harvested by B2Find, which is the metadata catalog. And other researchers can search for your data in B2Find and get linked to B2Share to download the data and reuse the data. So a lot has been done to support the FAIR principles within EUDAT, and this is in the vision of EUDAT to make sure that the data that is being generated is managed in a proper way and can be reused. An extensive amount of user documentation is available at EUDAT website. As you can see, there are different levels of user documentation, 3 different levels. One, if for using these services, if a single researcher or scientist wants to use any of these services to manage his or her data in a better way, you can use these services. But you can also, as a research community, deploy these services on your site and your research institute, and have a branded version of these services at your site. And you can also, at a more even higher level, engage these services and development of these services, because EUDAT services have been built in a very close collaboration with research communities and community requirements. And that's a very important factor within EUDAT that we want the researchers and research communities to get engaged in the whole development of the services. Training material, there's also a lot of training material available at EUDAT, which shows you how these services can be used and how they can be deployed, and etc. The main two sources for the training material are the EUDAT.eu/training, and also the GitHub of EUDAT training is a very good source where you can find different training materials for B2Safe, B2Share, B2Find, using these services or deploying it on your site. Okay, this brings me to the second half of my presentation. Luckily, I am on time. So in the next half an hour, I will show you some data pipelines and workflows on how these services can be used in practice. And I hope that, well, you can follow me for these demos. The first data pipeline I would like to show you is a pilot project we are doing together with CompBioMed for safe data replication. Most of you might know CompBioMed. It's a CompBioMed webinar. So it's one of the European Commission projects, one of the Center of Excellences, and the focus is on development of computational methods for biomedical applications. It's a community that a lot of data-intensive research is going on, and also it's a European project, so many different research institutes are involved across Europe. So one of the major requirements within this community was to transfer and replicate large amount of data across different HPC centers for involved in this project. And what we did was that we looked together how we can address this requirement with EUDAT services. The service that was mainly used was EUDAT B2services service, which is for safe data replication, and also applying data management policies, implementing data management policies. This is the data pipeline. As you can see, the data was produced in a laboratory in ESRF in France, and then it was transformed to the Barcelona Supercomputing Center for pre-processing of the data and computing the data. But of course, it would be much more powerful if the same data can be processed and the simulations can be run on the other two HPC centers involved in the project, Sursara in the Netherlands and EPCC in the UK. So what we did was to set up this pilot to replicate the data, the pre-processed data from BSC to Sursara and EPCC using B2Safe. The total amount of data was around 24 terabytes. So we made sure that the required resources are allocated in each of these centers, and then implemented the required B2Safe rules to replicate this data. We are currently at the infrastructure is in place, and we are testing, performing, doing performance tests on the network and on the redundancy by doing some test transfers. And once that is done, we will be able to easily replicate terabytes of data across these HPC centers. It can be like from that we replicate data from Sursara. Once the infrastructure is in place, we can also replicate data the other way around from Sursara, for example, to the other HPC centers. So in this sense, this makes the life for performing the research more efficient and easier for the researchers who need to do this intensive data sharing and data transfer. Okay, in the following, I'm going to show you a couple of demos for using B2Drop, B2Share, and B2Find, and also we'll show you a data publication workflow where from B2Drop you can publish the data that you have in your B2Drop cloud storage to B2Share, and also from B2Find how you can discover data now and download data. I would like to ask, if you haven't done it yet, to go to B2Access website. I will quickly show you, and make an account in the B2Access website so that you can follow the demo with me. This is the website. If you go to b2access.eudat.eu, and then the top right, register as an account, and then you will see create B2Access user account. So if you can make an account quickly, you can also follow the demo with me. I would like to ask Manuela if you can pose a question to see if you've been able to create an account in B2Access, and if yes, I would like to ask you to try to log in into the first service I am showing. I can see that the poll is in progress for the attendees, so if you can try that and provide an answer, it would be good to see how many people are actually following the demo. So once you click on this, you will be forwarded to this page where you can well, fill in the required information: username, password, email, your institute, organization, and then just click submit. So, okay, I see that the pool is still in progress. If you already have the account, we can move on in B2Access. We can move on. You can move on to log in to the first service, which is called b2drop.eudat.eu. Okay, well, I see that 100% yes, that's very good. So hopefully you can follow me for the demo part. So the B2Drop service is, as I said, the cloud storage service that you get if you are a citizen scientist. To use this service, you should log in and provide and authenticate yourself. If I log in, I'll provide my own user credentials. You can also see that you can use your Google account or Facebook, or if you are already one of the part of one of the institutes listed here, you can also use your institutional account to log in. But I will log in with my B2Access account, and this is the homepage of my B2Drop account. You can see that I have been allocated 20 gigabytes of storage for free. I'm only using 5.8, but these are the files that I have in my home account. And if I well, click on more actions, you can see that I can rename the files or download the file or share the files. To upload new files, you can, well, click this little plus here and upload a new file or folder to your storage space. What you can also do, as I said, this B2Drop service is for secure data exchange and data sharing. And if you click on the shared link here, you can see that you can share this file or this folder with other researchers that also have a B2Drop account. So if I just click the name, you can see that you can choose the person you want to share the file with. It is also possible to share the file with in B2Share, which is basically publishing the file. I'm going to first quickly show you what B2Share looks like, and then we'll come back to this page to show you the integration between B2Drop and B2Share. So I am now going to b2share.eudat.eu. If you open a new tab and go to the b2share.eudat.eu link, you will see that this is the data repository where a lot of data has been stored. Here you can see the latest records that has been published in the data repository, and most of them are open. You can search for data here. If I click, for example, in this latest data that has been published, you can see that there is a title, there is an abstract, keywords, and also a DOI, a data object identifier, and a PID has been assigned to this data. And I can actually, well, click here to download the data myself. There is some basic metadata defined for this object. So if I go back, you can also see what communities are involved in B2Share. There are, I think, in total 19 of them. If I click on one of them, for example, BBMRI is one of the communities which does biomedical research. I'll zoom in a bit. You can see that there is a metadata schema defined for this community in B2Share. The first part is just basic metadata, community name, title of the data that will be published, description. You can see the ones that are required in orange. The creator, license, if any. And then if I scroll down, you can see that there are also some community-specific metadata defined for this community. So if I'm a member of the BBMRI community and I want to publish my images or my data that was linked to a publication, I can come to the B2Share and choose this community and then provide label my data with community-specific metadata, such as study name, age, description, study ID, well, the design that was used, etc. So as a research community, you can join B2Share to provide a metadata schema for the researchers in your community so that they can easily publish the data. If I go to upload, you can see that, well, I have to log in to be able to publish data in B2Share. So searching the repository, I do not need to log in, but if I want to upload a new record, a new data record, I need to be logged in. So I will try to log in first. Well, it's logged in with my B2 Access account. It's also important to note that so far we have been looking around into B2share.eudat.eu, which is the production instance of B2Share. Here you can see that for training purposes and testing, we have to use the training instance of B2Share. They are completely identical, but we do not want testing data to be published in the production instance. So I'm going to move to the test instance to show you how data can be published. Again, as I said, they are identical. Here you can see the latest test data that has been published. And to publish a data in B2Share, well, please always use the training instance. To publish data, you can, well, you also need to be logged in. I'm already logged in. Create a new account, then you have to provide a title for the data that you want to publish, demo, test. Then you have to choose a community that you want to publish your data with. If you do not see your community here, that's not a problem. You can always use the EUDAT community, which is, contains generic metadata that you have to provide for your data, and then create draft record. By creating a draft record, your data is still not published. As you can see, you have to provide more metadata, data about your data, and also provide the data files themselves. So I will, you can simply drag and drop files here or choose the data that you want to publish. I choose the test data. You can also see that you can add the files from your B2 drop. I will show that later to you. So here you provide some basic metadata fields like the title, description. This is a test. Creator, I'll put my name. Here you can specify if your data is open access or not. Regardless of that, your metadata will always be publicly available and published. Other metadata such as license, discipline, if you are from biomedical research or linguistics, you can specify these type of metadata. And then at the end, I can save the draft, then it will not be published yet, but if I choose submit draft for publication and then click on it, it will be published. And it's important to note that the data that is being published cannot be deleted anymore. You can edit the metadata, but you cannot delete the data or change the data itself. You can always add new versions of the data, but the data itself cannot be deleted. So this is the test instance, so I'll just submit and change. Please provide a correct value for the field descriptions. Okay. Oh, I should choose a type of the data that I'm publishing. Well, let's choose other. And then if I try again, save and publish, yes, you will see that the demo test data that I record that I created is now published with a data object identifier and a persistent identifier assigned. It's being published in the EUDAT community for now, and the basic metadata that I provide, which is basically the open access. So this is basically the B2Share, the data repository of EUDAT. Now I would like to show you the integration between B2Drop, which is your personalized well, cloud storage here, where you try to log in before and you have this 20 GB of storage for free, and try to see how you can publish your data from B2Drop to B2Share, which is the data repository. So if I click, for example, this data file, it's an image of EUDAT communities involved in EUDAT. I click on shared. As you can see, I can share it with other researchers that also have a B2Drop account, but I can also share it in B2Share, which means it will be published and shared with the public. So I have to provide a title for the data record that I want to publish. Then I have to choose a community. As you saw, if you don't see your community, your research community being listed here, you can always use EUDAT community for that. I can choose for my data to be open access or not, and then, well, click deposit to share the data. So let's try, and I see that transferring file to B2Share in the background. And review the status in the B2Share app. Okay, where is the B2Share app? In the top menu, if you see that there is this little icon of B2Share. If you click on it, you can see that this is the data object that I sent for publication. It's scheduled to be published. If I scroll a bit, so you can also see a history of the data that you have been published before. For some reason, the last few ones did not work. I've got an error. So, but I can show you. Well, it takes a couple of minutes so that it gets scheduled, and actually the data draft is being created in B2Share. But I can show you one of the earlier tests I did. If you click here on the deposit URL, you will be forwarded to B2Share, to the data repository, with the draft record created. So The title is the test from B2drop. This is the description is this is to test integration between B2drop and B2share, and as you see, the data record is being created. Okay, so this is basically to show you that B2drop and B2share are integrated with each other, and basically facilitates the publication of the data that imagine that you have you work with some sample data and you have them stored in your personalized cloud B2drop, and then you want to publish them to make it available to the public, and you can directly do it from here. Okay, the next demo that I would like to show you is basically the B2Find service, which is the metadata catalog of EUDAT. As you can see, it's very simple, the interface. You can just search for any keyword and see the result. I will just search a researcher name that I know, and you can see that a lot of hits, a lot of research hits. What you can do is you can do faceted search, where you can filter your search by the time of or year of the publication of the data, or the community that the data has been published in. As you see, there are different communities. Maybe I should have showed you earlier. If you click on the communities, by the way, I'm in b2find.eudat.eu. This is the link for the metadata catalog. If you click on the communities, you can see that 22 communities are found. So you can do search community-based. There are communities from linguistics and social scientists all the way to biomedical and different fields. So you can do community-based search for data, which is very interesting. We can also do faceted search, as I said, and filter your data based on, again, communities or creator of the data, based on different disciplines that you have, language, publisher, etc. So I would, for example, I know that my the researcher I know is in the field of linguistics. If I filter my search based on that and do the search again, you can see that I have only 2 hits, which makes it more easy to find the data that I'm looking for. And this is basically the PhD thesis of that researcher. If I click on it, you can see that there's a title, abstract, and some very basic metadata like the DOI and PID, the source where the data is, metadata creator. So if I click on the PID, for example, on the persistent identifier, it will forward me to data repository that the data is stored and where I can download it. So this B2Find basically helps you to discover the data that you need by all sort of filters and search that you can do on the data. And then once you find the metadata, you can, by the use of PID, you can link back to where the data is stored. So if I click on the PID link, you will see that it forwards me again to B2share, because this data has been published in the B2share repository. In place of B2share, there can be other repositories depending on where the data lies. But well, in this case, it's being stored in B2share. So this basically also shows the integration between B2Find and B2share to help you discover data and find data and download the data and reuse the data, which is a very important factor in the FAIR principles. So here you can see more about the data, the abstract again, well, which community it has been published in the Clarion community, keywords, PIDs, and here are the data files that I can actually download and use. And also more metadata about this data file, like basic metadata, and also community-specific metadata, in this case, Clarion metadata. So this, yeah, as I said, the integration of these tools has also been a very important factor to facilitate the discovery of the data and using the data. I see that it's almost 5 minutes left, so I would like to wrap up here, going back to my presentation slides. Yeah, and if there was any questions, I will be happy to answer. But for more detailed questions, as I said, you can send an email to me or always contact the EUDAT help desk or EUDAT contact, fill in the EUDAT contact form, and they will get back to you with more detailed information about possibilities, etc. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nars, for such a great webinar. So I would like to just add a small note to the poll question. I know that it says 100% said yes, but only 2 people out of the 10 attendees were able to vote. So maybe they were caught within the transition. I know that the timeline was a bit quick to really set up a proper account. There is one question from Jerome Noeli. I hope I got the last name correct. He asks, metadata are mentioned, but it is unclear to me how ontologies and disambiguation problems are managed.
Yeah, so there are different services, as I said, B2Find, B2Share, that support metadata. If, for example, from a community point of view, you would like to add metadata, community-specific metadata to these services, it has to be a close collaboration between your community and EUDAT to tackle these technical requirements for adding these metadata to the services that we have to B2Share, for example. So yeah, it's a data repository with supporting metadata functionality. So if the question is too deep into how this thing is being handled from the ontology part, well, I would advise to fill in your question within the contact form, and then the technical team can inform you more about the technicalities that is being addressed to handle this. But as I said, if as a research community you want your research, you want your community-specific metadata to be available in these services, then you have to contact us, and then together with us we will identify what those are and incorporate them into our into EUDAT services. So I hope this answers somehow the question.
Yeah, great, thank you. I have a question myself, so it's a bit broader of a question. So I'm an early stage researcher, and let's say hypothetically I get a paper published in an open data journal that requires my data to be open. It seems that this B2Share is a good option for me. It seems to me that it's free for the first 20 gigabytes. Am I correct with that?
So you're mixing B2Share and B2Drop. B2Drop is the decentralized cloud storage where you can where you get 20 gigabyte of storage for free. B2Share is the service for, as you said, publishing your data and make your data open. Yeah, there is certain limits that you can publish the data. You cannot all of a sudden publish the terabytes or petabytes of data. But I think up to 2 gigabytes will be supported. But if your community wants to support more, then you can always contact B2Share and in collaboration with them deploy your local instance of B2Share at your research institute. And then attach it to your to whatever storage in the backend, and then you can use it to publish a large amount of data. But as a single researcher who has a publication and wants to publish megabytes or gigabytes of data and link it back to his or her publication, B2Share is a perfect place to publish the data.
Great. And one last thing, is CompBioMed a community in B2Share?
CompBioMed is still not a community in B2Share, but we have initiated some activities to make that happen. So that you can see CompBioMed as one of the communities involved in B2Share, where metadata and community-specific metadata can be defined. So as a researcher within CompBioMed community, if you go to B2Share, you can click your own community and publish your data, whatever data, if it is images or community-specific data, so that you can add the community-specific metadata as well. So this is an activity that we have started, and well, I hope that this webinar will shed light a bit about how these services can facilitate researchers in all communities, but also CompBioMed, and we hope that in the near future we can make that happen.
Great, thank you very much. So I think that brings us to the hour and should bring this webinar to a close. I would like to mention that this webinar has been recorded and will be put online underneath on the CompBioMed website underneath the training tab. So I would just like to thank you one last time, Narjus, for such a great webinar.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Of course. And I would like to officially close this webinar and wish everyone a good afternoon. Bye-bye, everybody.